Ryan Day loses to Michigan big again, like 20 plus points, do you think his job is in jeopardy? And well, I'll let you answer that, and I want to talk to you a little bit about recruiting.
So I think you bring up a good point about the spread of the game, the point spread of the game, because on one hand, it shouldn't matter. You either win the game or you lose the game, but it does speak to how well is he preparing his team for the game. You know, if Michigan's a juggernaut again next year, let's say they come into this game, they're number 2 in the country, they're 11-0, they're at home. Let's say Ohio State has whatever season they have at that point. Maybe they're 10-1, and it's this Titanic matchup again. And you lose that game 31-28 on a last-second field goal. Okay, this was just a colossal matchup, 2 great teams. And sure, it's disappointing. It's not acceptable. Got to beat Michigan, got to win the Big Ten, all those things. But there's a difference between what we saw this last year in Columbus and the year before in Ann Arbor, where all of us can point to, that's a breakdown. That's a breakdown. Why is that happening? They're not good enough there. They're not good enough here. Versus the kind of game they played against Georgia in the playoff, where you're like, well, you know, that was a rough one.
Yeah.
Wish they would have won, but they played about as well as you could.
Yeah.
And so you've got a great point there.
Probably win that game if Marvin doesn't get hurt.
Yeah, they probably did. There's, you know, it's one of those games where, just like the Michigan game, you can point to like 7 different things and say, if any one of those 7 things didn't happen, they win the game.
Unfortunately, I was there live to see that. Yeah.
Yeah. Otherwise, we've got an all Big Ten championship game. That would have been something else, huh?
Amazing.
So to answer your question, I think that this game is unlike any other game in the country because it holds so much weight that you can churn out 11-1 seasons and still be considered a failure because you lost that game. And so I do think at some point there's a breaking point. How many coaches get fired after going at that point an 11-game season? John Cooper got fired after going 8-3 because he lost to Michigan. I don't think he gets fired if they're 11-1 and they lose to Michigan, because I also think the powers that be are going to understand, okay, we're now in a 12-team playoff, and then it's really going to become more about what did you do in the playoff?
Absolutely.
And something about that rubs me the wrong way, but that's just going to be the way it is.
Definitely. Regarding the recruiting, do you think that Ohio State, they seem to try and get the big fish first and then kind of circle back to the state when maybe they don't get some of the guys they want? It just seems like, you know, obviously Michigan is making some inroads. They had 4 guys in the 23 recruiting class from Ohio. In the 24 class, it looks like they're probably going to take both the top 2 offensive tackles in Ohio. Hamilton's already committed. Rumor is Roebuck is pretty close to committing. I think they're 1-2 as far as offensive tackles in Ohio. Jordan Marshall is a lean right now. It's probably more like 50-50. But still, if you get the number 1 back in Ohio, the top 2 tackles in Ohio, Scott, the stud defensive back, was here this weekend. You know, it seems like there could be a small change in the recruiting that's taking place. And I'm just wondering if, again, the question is, you think Ohio State is so used to going out and grabbing who they want and circling back to Ohio when some of those guys that they want, maybe they're not getting.
So I broke down the recruiting numbers since Harbaugh took over and posted a video a couple of weeks ago about this. And one thing that caught my eye that was not a big surprise is that the difference in the number of players that Harbaugh signed from Ohio versus Meyer and Day signed from Michigan was about 2-1. It's like 80-some to 40-some, with more players coming from Ohio to Michigan. Well, that doesn't surprise anyone. But I do think that while Ohio has been a better high school football playing state pretty much forever, I think that gap is closing. Ohio is not what it used to be, and Michigan has produced a pretty high level of, at least at its top level, its top 8 to 12 players are getting pretty darn good, and there's not the gap that there used to be. And so I would think it would be a huge priority, should be a huge priority in an average Ohio high school year. The top 6 to 7 players should be Ohio State targets for sure. And then even past that, there should be players there that are going to be program players if they so choose to go after them. But they should be hot after the top 7 or 8 players in the state.
Absolutely. Well, we're glad they're not currently. And, again, the 24 class could be, could be something special for Michigan, especially with a couple of these guys from Ohio, along with the Jaden Davises and the running back from Texas, Tatum.
Yep.
We know we had a very disappointing 23 class, but if Davis commits, I'll be shocked if this is not a top seven class. The trajectory that it's going right now.
Yeah.
Assuming Davis commits, 5-star quarterback.
I think that Urban Meyer discovered something. When he came in, he was just full bore. We take the best players. So we don't care if we get one Ohio player. I'm overblowing that a little bit, but he was all about national recruiting. And then at some point in his tenure, I think he kind of acknowledged, and he's not one to acknowledge he makes a mistake, but you could kind of hear it in there. Not that he just flat out stated it, but you could hear that at some point he realized, okay, we're going to lose this state. I can't do this. I got to figure out what that balance needs to be. And I think Ryan Day does the same thing. I think he understands how important Ohio is from an optics standpoint, and that there are 5 or 6, 7, 8 players that should be on the Ohio State roster from Ohio each recruiting class. But, maybe these 2 consecutive wins by Michigan resonate.
And Michigan does a great job of turning those 3 stars into NFL players.
Mm-hmm.
And not that Ohio State's really recruiting 3 stars. That's an opportunity that Michigan takes advantage of. Rod Moore, for an example. I think PFF has him in the top 2 safeties returning. He's probably going to be an All-American this year on the 1, 2, or first, second, or third All-American teams. He was a 3-star of Ohio. A guy Ohio State obviously overlooked. Most of their concentration is on the 4 and 5-star guys, and so Michigan definitely does a great job with finding those 3-star diamond in the rough type guys like Rod Moore.
And I would be okay with any program focusing more on the 4 and 5-star guys if that's their evaluation. And I can't answer that. Nobody can answer that, instead of whether they're relying on the recruiting services to tell them who the best players are. And then I know that they do their due diligence. They don't just blindly take these kids, but certainly whether they're going, okay, we just look 4 and 5 stars, and then we go evaluate them, and then we determine out of those 4 and 5 stars who we want, versus, hey, we're going to really look at these 3-star players. And especially once a Michigan becomes, a serious candidate, or schools like that, Notre Dame, Penn State, for a 3-star in Ohio, especially in Ohio, that they should be evaluating them. And if they passed on him just because they misevaluated him, that's one thing. But if they just sloughed him off because he was a 3-star, then they're not doing their job.
Well, look, man, I appreciate you having me on. It's great that the rivalry's back, because it was boring there for a while, getting beat up every year, Mark.
Was it?
It's great that we're having these conversations, and the rivalry's back.
All right, Shane. I'm not going to agree with that, but I totally get your point. You're right, but I'm not going to agree with that. So if you can respect that,
no problem.
That's where I'm at on that. But yes, the rivalry is at its best. Any rivalry, when it's intriguing and equal and all those things. So there's no doubt about that.
Yep. Thanks for having me on, Mark.
Thanks, Shane.